They called themselves the arbiters of civilization, the keepers of order across 1,000 star systems. For millennia the Galactic Council had dictated what was lawful, what was forbidden, and what every species must obey. To them, law was not guidance but absolute rule. Dozens of civilizations had risen and bowed to their authority, forced to abandon technologies deemed too dangerous, compelled to surrender weapons considered disruptive, and taxed to ensure loyalty. No one challenged them. No one dared. When humanity joined, the Council expected nothing different. The moment Earth sent its first delegation, whispers spread across the chamber. Their lifespans were too short, their biology too fragile, their history too violent. Every other species had centuries of stability before venturing into the stars. Humans carried scars of endless wars. The Council studied their records and found chaos, revolutions, rivalries, entire continents drenched in conflict. To them, humanity was proof that instinct could triumph over reason, that impulse ruled them more than intellect. So restrictions were crafted specifically for Earth. Their fleets could not exceed a certain tonnage. Their orbital stations would be monitored. Their colonies were forced to report yields directly to the Council. What other races earned through trust, humans received through suspicion. Yet every decree was passed without resistance, and every sanction accepted without complaint. When human ambassadors stood before the chamber and bowed, the Council marked it as confirmation of weakness. Arrogance spread quickly. A diplomat from a long-established empire mocked the way humans spoke, claiming their voices lacked refinement. Another described their fragile skin and short lives as evidence they were unsuited for leadership. Laughter often followed whenever humanity's name was raised, the kind of laughter reserved for children pretending to play war. When proposals were made by Earth's representatives, they were dismissed before the words were finished. It was not cruelty, they claimed, but necessity. The galaxy could not afford instability, and humans embodied instability more than any other. Behind the walls of the chamber, debates grew even bolder. Some suggested humanity should never have been admitted at all, that their entry was a mistake made in haste. Others argued Earth could be reshaped, slowly broken of its instincts, and molded into obedience. The Council had done this before with lesser species, and it had worked. The assumption was that humanity, too, could be made to kneel in spirit as well as body. During one particularly smug session, a senior official asked what might happen if Earth refused compliance. The response was not silence, but laughter that rolled through the chamber. Refusal was impossible, they declared. No species had ever defied the Council and survived. The treaties were iron, the laws immovable, the fleets unmatched. Any attempt to resist would be crushed before it began. To them, humanity was a footnote in galactic history, destined only to be managed, never to be feared. In the archives of that day's session, one phrase stood out. They are loud, they are restless, but they are weak. It became the tone of every interaction with Earth thereafter. Resources were demanded not with negotiation but with command. Colonies were inspected not as allies but as subjects. Every reminder of Earth's place was delivered with contempt thinly veiled as diplomacy. For the Council, it was order. For humanity, it was humiliation. Yet even then, even as they mocked and underestimated, none of them saw the quiet exchange of glances among the human delegation. None noticed the stillness behind their polite nods. They were too busy congratulating themselves on their dominance, too blinded by centuries of unchallenged authority to imagine that the very species they dismissed as weak might be listening carefully, learning every weakness, memorizing every arrogance, and waiting. The Council recorded its victory that day as it had countless times before. Another species folded neatly into the hierarchy. Another world brought under the laws they considered sacred. No one spoke of consequences, because consequences had never existed. But buried beneath their certainty was a truth they could not see. Humanity was not surrendering. Humanity was watching, biding its time, and weighing what survival demanded. The restrictions did not end. Each cycle brought new decrees, each one heavier than the last. Earth was ordered to hand over portions of its orbital trade routes to Council regulators. Colonies were told they could not expand without permission, and even then, only into sectors the Council approved. Every resource mined, every shipment sent, every ship constructed was tracked and taxed until profit turned to debt. To the Council, it was balance. To humanity, it was suffocation. The pressure intensified when a fleet under Council command occupied a human colony after accusing its leaders of hoarding resources. The occupation was declared legal under Article 17, a clause buried in treaties humanity had never been allowed to contest. But legality did not change what happened on the ground. Thousands were executed publicly as an example, and survivors were stripped of citizenship until they bowed to alien overseers. Images of the massacre spread across Earth and its colonies faster than any censors could suppress them. It was the first time the galaxy saw the mask slip. In the halls of power on Earth, the debates grew heated. Some argued for patience, claiming that enduring humiliation was safer than facing extinction. Others demanded defiance, insisting that to bow further was to erase what it meant to be human. Scientists warned that under current restrictions, technological progress would halt within a generation. Generals spoke of fleets rusting in orbit, forbidden from modernizing. Leaders looked at one another and realized the truth: if humanity continued on this path, it would not survive long enough to matter. Quietly, decisions were made. In underground facilities, old projects long considered impossible were reopened. Research banned by Council law was removed from storage and studied again. Military blueprints once locked away under the guise of peace were dusted off and updated. Every step broke a rule, but every step was necessary. Humanity had tried obedience and found only chains. The time for obedience had ended. Across the colonies, whispers spread. Ships once marked as decommissioned were being rebuilt in secret. Supply convoys vanished from Council tracking systems. Communications once monitored grew encrypted, shielded against surveillance. What appeared to be weakness was, in truth, preparation. Humanity was building something in the shadows, and the galaxy had no idea. But it was not only technology that changed. Something older awakened: unity. Rival nations that had once competed now sat at the same table. Corporations that had undercut one another pooled resources. Old disputes faded in the face of survival. Humanity, fractured for so long, spoke with one voice. It was not a voice of submission, but a voice that whispered the same words in every corner of Earth and its colonies: never again. The Council, blind in its arrogance, mistook silence for compliance. Reports of unrest were dismissed as exaggeration. Evidence of missing resources was buried under bureaucracy. Delegates who raised concerns were laughed out of the chamber. To the Council, humanity was incapable of secrecy, incapable of unity, incapable of defiance. They did not see that what they had created was not obedience but resolve. The turning point came when human leaders gathered in secret beneath the surface of Earth. The air was tense, filled with the knowledge that what they were about to decide would shape not only their species but the galaxy itself. One by one, voices spoke. Some were weary, some were furious, but all carried the same conclusion. Compliance was death. Defiance was risk. Yet risk was life, and humans had always chosen life even when it meant walking through fire. The final agreement was unanimous. They would not petition. They would not beg. They would not wait for permission. They would act. They would break every chain, every law, and every restriction. The Council had written rules to control them. Humanity would write new rules in the language of survival. When the meeting ended, no declaration was made, no broadcast sent. The decision lived in silence, carried only in the hearts of those who knew. But from that moment forward, every engineer, every soldier, every scientist worked not for the Council but for humanity alone. The breaking point had been reached. The chains had been noticed. Now they would be shattered. The silence broke when the first Council convoy disappeared. Dozens of freighters escorted by patrol craft simply vanished between jump points. At first, officials blamed navigational errors or pirates, but soon the pattern became impossible to ignore. Convoys traveling near human space were being erased from existence. The Council launched investigations, yet every attempt ended in confusion. Records were corrupted, sensor logs unreadable, and survivors, when any existed, spoke of shadows that struck without warning, leaving nothing but wreckage. Then came the revelation no one expected. A listening post at the edge of a council-controlled sector was annihilated by a weapon thought lost to history. Gravitic shears tore the station apart, folding its structure as if it were paper. Such weapons had been outlawed millennia earlier after nearly collapsing a star. For centuries, their blueprints had been locked in council archives, hidden from every race. Now one had returned, and every trace of its design bore the signature of human engineering. Panic spread. The council summoned Earth's ambassadors, demanding answers, demanding confessions. But the humans offered only silence, their faces calm, their words measured. They denied nothing yet admitted nothing. When pressed, one representative spoke a sentence that chilled the chamber. "You forced us to kneel, and we learned to crawl. Now you will see what we became when we stood." More incidents followed. Communication arrays failed without warning. Fleets vanished into traps that should not have been possible. Reports described swarms of machines dismantling ships molecule by molecule, nanites that the Council had forbidden long before humanity even reached the stars. Others told of artificial intelligence commanding fleets with a precision beyond organic thought. Every strike was exact, every retreat calculated. Humanity was fighting in ways the Council had deemed impossible, because those ways had been written out of the rules. It was not raw strength that terrified them. Other empires had possessed greater fleets, larger armies, more planets. It was the refusal to obey limits that unsettled the galaxy. Where the Council had declared certain weapons too dangerous, humans built them. Where exploration had been restricted, humans ignored boundaries. Where treaties demanded weakness, humans forged strength in the shadows. No species had ever dared such open defiance. The Council gathered emergency fleets, drawing forces from across the galaxy. Thousands of warships assembled to enforce order, confident that sheer numbers would crush rebellion. Yet when they advanced toward human-controlled sectors, they found only silence. Sensors failed, navigation collapsed, and entire flotillas scattered in disarray. Humanity did not meet them in open battle. They struck where fleets were vulnerable, crippled supply chains, and left survivors adrift with only one message carved into their systems. "Your laws do not bind us." The Council realized too late what had happened. Every restriction, every sanction, every imposed limit had been a lesson to humanity. They had been forced to survive with less, forced to innovate under watchful eyes, forced to turn every weakness into a weapon. Now, unleashed, they used that ingenuity against their oppressors. What the Council saw as defiance was, for humanity, simply survival given shape. Fear began to seep into the chamber. For the first time in centuries, delegates spoke not with arrogance but with uncertainty. Could humanity be stopped? Could a species that ignored every boundary be contained? Suggestions were made to offer concessions, to ease restrictions, but pride silenced them. The Council still believed order could be restored, that humanity's rebellion was temporary. They did not yet understand that this was not rebellion. This was transformation. Every strike shook the illusion of control. Every broken rule reminded the galaxy that authority was fragile. In their desperation, Council leaders ordered harsher measures, declaring humanity an outlaw species, forbidding all contact, and threatening any ally that offered aid. Yet the more they pushed, the stronger humanity became. The laws meant to isolate Earth only forced its people closer together. The bans meant to cripple progress only accelerated hidden projects. The moment had arrived when the galaxy realized what they faced. Humanity was no longer a subject state, no longer a minor race to be disciplined. They had become something far more dangerous, a species willing to do what none else dared, a species that had nothing left to lose and everything to gain. The rules were broken, and with them, the order of the galaxy began to fracture. The first fortress fell without warning. A bastion that had stood for centuries, armed with weapons said to repel any enemy, was breached in less than an hour. Its defenses collapsed under assaults that exploited every overlooked weakness, and its fall sent shockwaves across the galaxy. Refugees carried stories of ships appearing out of nothing, of command centers silenced before they could issue orders, of entire garrisons surrendering without a shot because their systems had already been turned against them. What had once been the unshakable symbols of Council authority were now little more than targets. Every attempt at retaliation ended the same. Armadas gathered, confident in numbers, only to be unraveled piece by piece. Human fleets never fought where the Council expected. They appeared where defenses were thin, struck critical supply lines, and vanished before reinforcements could respond. An empire built on predictability now faced an enemy that thrived on chaos. Humanity refused every tradition of galactic warfare. There were no grand formations, no declarations, no warnings. Only precision and ruthlessness. The devastation spread faster than the Council could comprehend. Trade routes collapsed. Communications fractured. Allies once loyal began questioning their allegiance. If the Council could not protect itself, how could it protect anyone else? Worlds under Council rule whispered of humanity's defiance not with contempt, but with awe. The predators once mocked as reckless were becoming legends, their victories multiplying with terrifying speed. Humanity's strength was not only in weapons but in understanding the mind of their enemy. Where the Council assumed fear would break resistance, humans used fear as a weapon. Leaders were targeted first, communications disrupted, and misinformation planted so carefully that fleets turned on each other in suspicion. Some admirals, certain their officers were compromised, executed their own crews before facing the real enemy. The Council's order was collapsing from within, accelerated by every strike. Soon entire sectors lay abandoned. The Council could not hold them, and their forces bled away trying. When supply collapsed, so too did morale. Soldiers who had once believed in the Council's invincibility now deserted in silence. They fled to distant corners of space, preferring exile to certain destruction. Humanity had not only broken fleets, they had broken belief itself. The fear grew so strong that when human vessels appeared above certain worlds, resistance ended without a battle. Cities powered down their defenses and awaited judgment, not out of loyalty, but out of terror. For the first time in living memory, the galaxy understood what it meant to face an enemy that did not abide by shared rules. Humanity did not fight like others. They fought to end a system that had humiliated and strangled them. The Council's chamber reflected the despair. Delegates who once spoke with certainty now shouted over one another, demanding impossible solutions. Some begged for peace, others demanded total war, but none offered a path to victory. Messages arrived hourly with reports of new defeats. Fortress worlds gone. Colonies burned. Armies scattered. The illusion of control had shattered beyond repair. When the Council finally attempted to negotiate, their pleas were met with silence. Humanity had no interest in petitions or compromises. To them, the time for diplomacy had ended when the first colony was executed under Council law. Now every action was retribution. Every battle was a reminder that chains once placed on Earth were now turned against their makers. The galaxy learned to whisper carefully when speaking of humans. No one called them weak any longer. No one mocked their short lives or fragile bodies. They were predators, patient and merciless, willing to strike at the heart of the strongest empire without hesitation. For every world that fell, the legend grew, and with it the fear that there would be no end until the Council itself was erased. The chamber once seen as eternal shook under bombardments that cracked its walls. Records that had endured for millennia were scattered to the winds. Authority, once absolute, was now rubble. The Council had written rules believing they would last forever. Humanity had proven that forever was only an illusion. The chamber was silent when the last surviving delegates gathered. Once it had echoed with laughter and arrogance, now it reeked of fear. The banners of power that had hung for ages were torn, the defenses of the capital destroyed, and the fleets that once circled its skies reduced to drifting wrecks. The Council had ruled the galaxy for millennia, but now its leaders sat broken, waiting for a species they once mocked to decide their fate. The silence shattered when a single figure entered. No entourage, no escorts, no guards. Just one human, walking with steady steps across the ruined floor. The delegates straightened instinctively, though not from respect. Fear alone held their spines upright. Humanity had not needed legions to enforce its will. The destruction already spoken across the stars was proof enough. When the representative spoke, the words were calm, but each one carried the weight of a sentence delivered. The council was reminded of its arrogance, of how it had stripped humanity of rights, drained its colonies, and butchered its civilians under the false banner of law. They were reminded that every decree had been written to ensure weakness, every sanction designed to break spirit. And then came the truth they could not escape. Instead of breaking, humanity had adapted. Instead of surrendering, they had endured. And when endurance ended, they had chosen to strike back. The human did not shout. There was no need. The delegates had already seen fleets fall, empires crumble, and weapons return from myth to reality. Instead, the human explained the simple reality that now governed the galaxy. The council was finished. Its laws were dust. Its fleets were gone. What survived was allowed to survive only because humanity had chosen not to erase it completely. Survival was no longer the result of loyalty to the council but of mercy shown by the very species once dismissed as insignificant. An ultimatum followed. Humanity demanded complete autonomy. No decrees, no restrictions, no oversight. Earth would answer to no authority but its own. Every world that once followed the council would be free to choose its future, whether that meant alliance, neutrality, or independence. The old order was over, and nothing would bring it back. The delegates protested weakly at first, asking what would happen if they refused. The humans' response was colder than any weapon. Refusal had already been tested, and the galaxy had seen the result. One glance at the shattered walls of their chamber was enough to silence every objection. For the first time in their long history, the council did not negotiate. They submitted. But submission was not enough for the human. They declared that this victory was not only for Earth but for every species that had ever been bound by chains disguised as laws. The galaxy would remember that humans had broken every rule and survived, and that memory would serve as warning. Never again would decrees be enforced by arrogance alone. Never again would weakness be assumed because of patience. Humanity had proven that compliance was not surrender, only a mask waiting for the right moment to fall. The delegates sat in silence, understanding what had been done to them. They were not destroyed only because destruction was unnecessary. The point had been made. Their power was gone, not because their fleets were smaller, but because belief in their authority had been ripped away. From now on, every race in the galaxy would measure the Council's word against humanity's actions, and none would forget the difference. The representative turned to leave, offering no promise of peace, no reassurance of restraint. The last words spoken were simple, yet they etched themselves into the memory of all who heard them. You thought rules made you eternal. But rules break. You thought weakness defined us. Weakness taught us. And when survival demanded, we became the storm you could not contain. With those words, the chamber was left in silence once more. The Council, once eternal, now lived only as a reminder of failure. Humanity had not only risen, it had rewritten the order of the galaxy. And in every corner of space, from the smallest outpost to the greatest empire, one truth was whispered again and again: never underestimate humans, for when pushed beyond survival, they will shatter every law, every chain, and every empire that dares to stand in their way.